this. Going to show you where we are in the class. So today we're going to talk about Dawkins, Professor Dawkins, and your reading responses are there. Next week, reading Dennett. Daniel Dennett is his name. From some sections from a book called Breaking the Spell. It's broken up into two parts, so be sure you read both and their reading responses. And then 2 weeks from today, your first papers are due, so I'm going to go over these, okay? So let me see. Where's my option to put this in student view? Here we go. I'm going to put this in student view so we know what this looks like. Boom. All right, so if you see here at the top, this is where you'll be submitting the assignment. I've asked you to submit it as a PDF, please. Directions: you're to write a paper of 5 to 6 pages in length on one of the following topics. Please write your paper in 12-point Times New Roman font, blah, blah. I just want standard formatting. Don't mess around, please. These papers are due on March 2nd. So that's 2 weeks from today. Please submit them as a PDF on Canvas. I showed you where. I'll deduct a third of a grade for each day that their papers are late. I have come up with some topic options, but if you have something you'd rather write about, then I need to know about it, please. But I'm always open to suggestions. I recommend you talk to me at any point while you write these papers. You can simply email me questions or arrange a time to chat on Zoom and go over an outline with me or ask questions. The writing studio is up and running. I urge you to use them. You can work with their tutors remotely. Grading criteria: I'm looking for 4 things in these papers. Persuasive argumentation. These first papers, you are asked to take a stand on interpretation of one of the texts we've read. So you're going to, which means it is an argumentative essay. You need to make your case for the interpretation and support yourself with references to the text and the like. Quotes are good, but don't go overboard, okay? Secondly, your papers must be clear. I have to be able to understand what you're reading. Proofreaders can be invaluable here. I suggest you recruit one. Get a family member, friend, or again, someone from the writing studio. Correct grammar, that is part and parcel of clarity. If you're not writing in correct grammar, I won't be able to understand what you're saying. So if you know that you have recurring or routine grammatical issues, then please do see someone in the writing studio. Insightful comments and critique. This is what separates the good papers from the adequate ones. Make your paper interesting and include insight beyond what we discuss in class. I'm going to be asking you to footnote your quotes, which means that you will not be providing the reference material inside the text of the paper, right? So sometimes some of you may be used to writing papers, then quoting, and then putting the reference material in parentheses at the end of the quote. You will not be doing that in this class. In this class, you'll be doing the quote, writing your quote, and then you'll be inserting a footnote. A footnote, by the way, everybody, is a note in the footer of the page. And then in the footer of the page, that's where you put all your reference information. We'll be using something called Chicago style. Chicago style, some of you may be familiar with this. All it refers to really is the format of the reference material. This is an example of Chicago style right here. Author, title, city, publisher, year, page number. Please note you only give all the information, all the bibliographical information with the first footnote. All subsequent footnotes you only need to abbreviate. So you give James, page 345, for example, if you're quoting from William James. If you're writing about James, he, as you notice, he tends to quote other authors. So you may want to quote someone he's quoted. This is how I've indicated here how you do it. William James, variety, city, publisher, year, page, and then you say afterwards, semicolon, James is referencing, for example, Starbucks, Psychology of Religion, pages, blah, blah. In James's book, he gives the page numbers of these references, okay? So this only pertains to those of you who choose to write about James. If you wish to, please get in touch with me if you have any questions about that, okay? Topics, I'm just going to read them over and then I'll open it up for questions. Daniel Dennett suggests that many, if not most believers, especially in secular nations, are on the verge of atheism. He points to Europe and the US in particular, where they practice what he calls churchianity. Explain his argument. How does he make his case? Also, why do people cling to belief nonetheless in his view? Dawkins believes he can give an evolutionary account of religion. That is, he can explain the existence of religion in terms of evolution. Describe his account. How does the seemingly wasteful and extravagant phenomena of religion fit with the strict efficiency and simplicity of evolution as understood by biologists? 3, what does James mean by the sick soul and why is he interested in it? What examples does he give to illustrate? At the end of the chapter on the sick soul, he says the completest religions are those with the best developed pessimistic elements. What does he mean by this? Okay. So you can pick one of those, or if you have another idea you'd like to write on, I'm all ears. Does anybody have any questions?
I have one. I thought it would be 4 pages. So it's 5.
I don't know what I say.
You said it was 5 to 6, but when we talked, you said it was 4 to 5. But
Did they say something different in the syllabus?
I think so. I forgot.
All right, well then I'll fix that. Whatever the syllabus says. That's not my syllabus. What the hell? Where'd my syllabus go? I'll look at it later. Thank you, Natan. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. 4 to 6 is good usually, and 5 being the median point. So, other questions? Fear. Oh. Anybody else? Any other questions? No? Okay. Well, here's the deal. Next week, I'll talk about them some more. What else will I do? Yeah, we'll discuss them, and then we will also, I've also posted there on Canvas, I believe that's module 6. We will be discussing, in addition to your pay, sorry, I'm losing my track here. Module 6 is when your papers are due. And so I posted your paper topics for module 6, but also there is a footnoting a style sheet, which talks about how to footnote different types of sources, not that you need to for these papers, but we will going forward, and some stylistic pointers, I should say, as you write these papers. So next week, I'll talk a little bit about your papers some more, and then just to refresh your memory on them. And then I will be going over that footnoting a style sheet. Okay. So if anybody has any questions in the next week, please email me. Okay. And I can answer your questions. Okay, good. Are we all good? Last chance for anybody to chime in on the papers. All right, good. Well, let's see here now. How are things going with the class so far? Everybody okay with the reading responses and the readings? Anything I should be aware of? Okay, good. Keep me posted. Today we will be readings are a lot, Brittany says. This one for today, 88 pages, really?
You had like 2 pages per 1 page, pretty much.
I did the math. I came up to 70. I don't know how that came to 80. They will be declining from here. I know that. So I guess with Dawkins, I get a little bit. That's weird, Brittany.
Can I ask because I mean, I'm assuming it's written way more recently because that's how it was written. But like, when was this written? Because like, I mean, it was a lot of reading, but I didn't find it like particularly like like super challenging as opposed to like when we were reading when that was his face James, because like it was written very readable. Like you could knock it out in an afternoon.
Well, maybe that's why I got carried away with him, because I think he is he is quite readable. He's a very good writer. He's quite entertaining. 88 is definitely more than I would like to assign. So I'll take a look at that assignment. I'm a little surprised. But they will go down. They will go down as we go ahead. This was written, I'm looking here, 2006. Here's the book, The God Delusion. Oh God, it's a little shiny cover. The God Delusion. So funny. I bought this book a few years ago on Amazon, used. Bang. It's signed by him. It was made out to Phil. I don't know who Phil is. I got a signed copy. That's pretty sweet. Anyway, good. So why don't we just start see what you all thought about this. Chris says found it readable. Anybody else want to chime in their impressions on this reading? On Dawkins?
I didn't find it as readable. I think he tended to like, he does this thing that I think a lot of academic writers do. It's not just him, where like he needs to prove how smart he is. And it's like, dude, I get it. I'm already reading your book. Like, and I'm like, can we get to the point? Anyway.
Okay.
No, yeah, I totally agree with that. And like, also sorry if my audio's off because my sister's also in Zoom class. But yeah, because like, I mean, readable, but like, I do agree that it was dense. Like, he was one of those people who's like, here is every single example that I'll give you. And here's my, like I said, like, it felt really, like, I don't know. I feel like when I read it, it was kind of funny to me because it felt like a Redditor who's like going off on his little Reddit page, like talking about like, this is why God doesn't exist and this is why you're dumb, whatever. And I was like, okay, all right.
Yeah, it felt very old man shaking his fist with the kids in his front lawn a little bit.
Definitely.
And it was
There you go.
no, Zach, listen, King, get your
I definitely had the same impression as Chris, and like I kind of like it seems like a stance that is kind of like pretty common for some of our contemporaries. I've definitely seen like a similar perspective on evolution versus creationism taken by like people of my age online. I've definitely, so I agree with what you're saying.
You know, that was interesting because I agreed with what he was saying, like a lot of the points he was making about like people who are in that ignorance. I remember oh my gosh, we literally had a question about it, the gap thing. Like when he went
God of the gaps.
Yes, I was like, oh, you're mine, King, you're right. But then he would like say other shit that I was like, fuck you. Like my brain was literally just like, I don't want to listen to this clown, you know. But I was like, he's kind of right, but also like, I don't want to listen to this clown. I think what Arthur said, like I picked up on his like bad attitude. I was like, I don't like this. Like I Googled him. I was like, your Anglican upbringing. What have you been through, sir, that you get to talk about how you wouldn't do terrorism? Okay. Try having the United States murder your wife and daughter and then come back to me later about that, bro. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I definitely felt like uncomfortable, especially reading that part where it's like, here's this white American dude
He's actually British.
British.
White guy, general.
No, that's what I was like. Don't talk about American politics, you British fool. That's already like. Sorry, I'm so keep going, Chris. Oh my gosh.
No, it's fine. But it's like, yeah, I mean, like finding out that was written in 2006, it's like, okay, like at that point, like a lot of countries are very entrenched in that area, but it's still like, it was just really uncomfortable reading that. Like, I don't know if anyone else also, I mean, yeah, I guess like then you mentioned also feeling uncomfortable with it.
Yeah.
Let me interject here. I see passions are high. Couple things. First of all, don't forget to use the raise hand thingy, Mabob, when you want to chime in. That makes it easier for us to get people in line. Secondly, Dawkins, he is he's a very noted scholar. Raise your hand, thingamajiggy, if you've heard of him before. Oh, okay, never mind. Oh, a couple people. There we go. He is part of a group of writers and academics that we'll be talking about in the next few weeks. These are what we call public academics or public intellectuals. They're intellectuals who write for beyond their own academic audience. And this group in particular we'll be talking about the next few weeks are a group called the New Atheists. And they include Dawkins. They include Dennett, who we'll be reading next week. They include a guy by the name of Christopher Hitchens, who was one of the more popular ones. There's also an American by the name of Sam Harris who's involved. He's quoted here. Dawkins, you may have noticed, he's an evolutionary biologist. He's written a lot of other very famous books. His most famous one is called The Selfish Gene. That was written in the mid-90s, I believe. I'll admit I have not read it. This is the only book of his I'm familiar with. Daniel Dennett will be reading next week. He is a philosopher, and he's definitely less bombastic, and his style is less, he's a little more clinical. He's based at Tufts in Massachusetts. He's a philosophy professor. Christopher Hitchens was truly remarkable. I bet your parents know him. 10 years ago, he was all the rage. He was British. He came to the States and he ends up dying here. And on his deathbed, all these Christians were trying to convert him. And he used to do the rounds of like the Bill Maher show and give talks with a scotch in one hand, cigarette in the other, and just throw bombs. And he wrote a book about 15 years ago called God Is Not Great. And then Sam Harris, he's an American. I'm not sure his background, actually, so I'm not going to say anything else about him. Why are these guys called the New Atheists? I'm not really sure. I just know that's their title. What is new about them? I think what's new about them, you know, as a philosopher, thinking about the history of philosophy and the history of atheism, what is new about these guys is probably their very wide, the breadth of reach, because they're writing in a style that's a popular style, and they're good writers. Hitchens was an excellent writer. I forgot to mention, Hitchens was the editor of Esquire. He was an excellent writer, and if you're interested, he has several collections of essays, articles that are out there, and really exquisite. He's much better than Dawkins even, but Dawkins is a great writer. For a scientist, he's a phenomenal writer. You don't usually see scientists write that well or that accessibly. I think what's new about him is, what's new about these guys is that they're writing for a popular audience, because that was not always the case for atheists. Atheists for much of history, in the West, you only start having self-proclaimed atheists in about the 1800s. They were few and far between. And so, you know, you might not have been inclined to out yourself, and certainly you would not have been inclined to try and promulgate broadly. The other thing that I think is new about this group of atheists here, by the way, another one who is often grouped with this group is a guy by the name of Martin Amis, who is a British author. And I think Salman Rushdie is also counted with these guys. He is a Muslim, he was born Muslim, lives in Britain, and he writes a lot of polemical works against Islam. And I know he's an ally of these bunch. I don't know if he's included among the New Atheists, but I know he's of their ilk. And I think the other thing that characterizes these New Atheists is that they take a strident tone, right? They go on the offensive. And whereas earlier atheists would poke holes in the theory of God, in the proofs of the existence of God, things like that, the New Atheists fully endorse a new approach to religion, which is not only that religion is improbable, but they start arguing that religion is immoral. Now, I don't think this is entirely new, because I was telling you last week that Freud says as much in The Future of an Illusion, which was written in the 1920s, but that was not a widely held and widely advanced view. With these guys, this becomes really routine. Okay. And that took a lot of believers by surprise, I think. It's one thing to say about religious beliefs, I doubt what you're saying. It's another thing to say religion is immoral. And here is the other point. They really come to the fore in the early 2000s after 9/11. And so a lot of their anti-religion rhetoric and arguments, many of them are British. A lot of their arguments are very critical of Islam. And so we'll be seeing that in the next 2 weeks. You know, in Europe, this is the issue they're dealing with. Christianity is on the wane, and the population of Muslims is growing, and religious fervor among Muslims has not declined in Europe. In fact, there's a stark contrast, right, between Christian secularism and atheism in Europe and the religious fervor of Muslims that are living there in places like Amsterdam, very liberal cities like Amsterdam and Paris and London. And a lot of these new atheists are very critical of the religious beliefs and the religious practices of those groups. So Dawkins is really important today. We'll be reading him in Dennett these next 2 weeks. And then after that, we'll be dealing with some of the repercussions of that. When we look at Marilyn Robinson and when we look at Terry Eagleton, my favorite, they take them on pretty strongly because they feel that this is a very important attack. Okay. So I'm not sure where you guys would like to dive in here. There's a couple things. I do want to do one thing today. I would like to break up into breakout rooms at some point. I'm not hearing from everybody evenly, so I want to break you all up and see if I can get some of you talking. But before we get there, maybe we could talk about the opening here. You'll notice that he is very critical of ID, intelligent design. So maybe we should make sure we understand a couple terms. What is intelligent design? Go for it.
I mean, it's basically the idea that the world was created and not an evolved thing, and that some higher power or like more intelligent power designed all of it. At least that's the way it seemed like Dawkins was describing it.
Good. Yeah. Anybody know any other terms that might be interchangeable with intelligent design? Go for it.
It is basically creationism, but it does allow for the possibility that aliens created us, at least in terms.
Okay, I wasn't prepared for that, but at Micah, you should be prepared for anything. Let's just limit ourselves to God. I don't have the energy to contemplate aliens today. That's another class. Anyway, creationism, intelligent design. Yes. Monsters Inc. person. Who is this?
Oh, that's me. It's Gia.
Gia.
I was going to say something along the lines of like divine intervention.
Yeah. Well, intervention means, yeah, I mean, if it's intelligent design, that means there can be divine intervention. But it's the idea that creation was designed by some kind of being with a mind and with certain intentions in mind, right? Good. And he is very critical of that. He opposes to it. Well, let's start at the very beginning. He opens up with this issue, this idea of the Boeing 747 gambit. That word gambit is all over the place these days. Anybody watch the Queen's Gambit? I did. I didn't really like it. Boeing 747 gambit. What's that all about? Chris, you have the floor.
Yeah, so he writes it as, he said the probability of life originating on Earth is no greater than the chance that a hurricane sweeping through a scrapyard would have luck to assemble a Boeing 747. So yeah, and then he goes on to write this in a nutshell is the creationist favorite argument, an argument that can only be made by somebody who doesn't understand the first thing about natural selection. So it's basically like assuming that like chance plays this much larger role in like creation than it actually does.
Okay. Thank you. Anybody else want to chime in? What position is the Boeing 747 gamut supposed to support? Rebecca.
I think it's meant to support creationism because they're saying like it's like I'm trying to think of it from the perspective of like what I was taught as a kid, which is like the Big Bang theory or like evolution theory. It can't possibly be true because why, like things can't just happen. How would all of this perfectly arrange itself automatically by chance? Like that's the argument that they're making.
That's basically it. That's right. The design in this universe that we see on the whole and in the littlest things, you know, last week it snowed here and the snowflakes were huge and you could see that each one was an individual, you know, you could see its design. And it's remarkable how each snowflake is a different design. And it looks, they're intricate, you know, and from the large to the small, everything looks designed. And the point of the Boeing 747 gambit, which is the argument of creationism or intelligent design, is that this can't possibly be the result of chance because the odds are so great. All right. How does he respond to this? Sunny?
Oh yeah, he responds that people who try to prove creationism is right have got the idea wrong. The thing is that not all of it just happens in one go, and all the numbers and the planets have to, you know, align perfectly. It's just that evolution is actually an incremental process of slowly going up the slope. That's
Right.
what he says.
Right. So according to creationists, the options are design or chance. In other words, if this all is not the result of a design, then it is all the result of chance. And he says that's a false option. The options are actually design versus natural selection. Okay. And as you point out, natural selection, he says, is on page 147, is a, yes, his cliff face argument. It is a cumulative process that breaks up the problem of improbability up into smaller and smaller pieces. Okay. Hang on, Finn, let me just finish this point here. On its own, each organism seems the result of irreducible complexity. He gives the idea of that bacterium flagellum, which that was a hard one for me. Irreducible complexity. This is the idea that you can't break up, right? You can't understand these entities in their constitutive parts. You can only understand them together. Actually, for artists, the example you guys should understand is the arch, right? You guys know about this with the keystone and the arch? I saw a show about this on Nova documentary once. It was fucking awesome. Like, you know, medieval archaeologists studying all these arches in the cathedrals, and they're like, whoa, how did they know to build this? You guys all, hopefully you all know the physics behind it, right? That the keystone holds the other stones in place. They all hold each other together with tension. And the archaeologists on this documentary are like, how did people figure this? How did they do this? I think it was the Romans. Like, how did the Romans do this? And they figured out. You guys know what they did? Okay, Chris. Aliens. Wrong.
The thing that was it starts with an S. It's like, is it scaffolding something? It starts with an S. He says it in the reading.
Actually, M is right. They took aliens and they stacked them on top of each other.
But
And
like
then
this the
they
supports to
built-
hold the arch, and then when it was built, they took it away so it could just stand on its own.
That's what I remember from the documentary. They found results of a former scaffolding. The Romans had built a scaffold, then they put the arch on top of it, then they removed the scaffold. And so his point is that what seems to be irreducibly complex, meaning in the arch, if you take one piece away, the whole thing crumbles. What seems to be irreducibly complex, you just haven't looked hard enough to figure out how it was built. Okay, sorry, Finn. I got a little sidetracked.
No, you are absolutely fine. Whenever I read readings like this, I always like absorb information by association. So I have no idea if he actually said something like this. But when he was talking, or I looked up that concept of like, oh my gosh, the thing that Christian said, like, how could it happen or how could it not happen all at once? Like about whatever, his response to creationism, basically. And there was this cool thing I read about like how just like the incomprehensibility of time and of how much time like Earth has been around completely separated from us. And it was just talking about how like it's like, who are you to say like anything is anything if a mollusk billions of years ago said, I'm gonna be a human about this, you know, like, so it's just like, I don't know, like I'm always gagged when I look at those like time charts and like how long ago the dinosaurs were and how long ago that we thought these two dinosaurs that hung out actually never met because they were all extinct or something. I don't know. My point is, I don't know, time is just interesting. And I think that it's so fascinating when people say it was all at once, because I'm like, well, I talked to the rock about this, and this rock is billions of years old. So I don't know.
No, I think you raise a great point. One of his recurring complaints about critics of evolution, and often these are the creationists, but not always, one of his complaints about them is that they refuse to imagine, or they have a lack of imagination of how long and this process could be, how complicated the process of evolution could be, right? And it is incredibly long, right? For people who look at these beings and say, you know, I don't know, a bat or butterfly, say, but how could you imagine this came to be through natural selection? It is a remarkable being. Clearly, God made it. The Darwinian will say, listen, it took an incredible amount of time through incredible amount of trial and error to get there, right? Zach.
One term that he uses that I thought was really interesting is the geological timescale, when he refers to like fossils existing on a timescale that is geological, and like it as a result is like hard for us to even contextualize. And then also what one kind of interesting argument that he makes about or one way that he refers to people that that say there's no way that this could have happened at once is that when he says like there's no way you can imagine that this all came to be, it's like you said, a lack of imagination. I thought that was an interesting way of referring to people who can't see another way of creation other than what they believe in.
Good. Yeah. Good. Right. He also puts it this way. He talks about the worship of gaps, right? That the critics of evolution, they seize on those gaps, and there's always going to be gaps, right? There, as a scientist, he wants to argue we're happy for the gaps because this gives us something to figure out. But he's upset that his critics seize on those gaps and say, aha, because there's a gap, clearly it's design. And his point is, whoa, you know, that's not necessarily the case. We just haven't figured it out yet, right? And so this leads to a pretty contentious statement. This is on page 153. He does not mince words. This is the top of 153. He says, there is then an unfortunate hookup between sciences, am I right? Yeah, methodological need to seek out areas of ignorance, okay, in order to target research, and intelligent design's need to seek out areas of ignorance in order to claim victory by default. It is precisely the fact that ID has no evidence of its own, but thrives like a weed in gaps left by scientific knowledge that sits uneasily with science's need to identify and proclaim the very same gaps as a prelude to researching them. Aiden.
I think on the page before that, 152, he mentions how wanting, or like how, I guess in modern times, creationists wanting to fill in historical or scientific gaps becomes political, in the way that scientists are hesitant to release like a statement where they say they don't know if something, what happened at some point, because they don't want other people jumping in to fill in the blanks.
Yeah, that's right. Good point. Thank you. Chris.
Yeah, I thought it was like interesting. It's like it's later than this part in the reading. I had it highlighted, but the PDF is glitching on me. But yeah, and so like he's doing like an impression of creationists, and he brings up this like, and there's this statement at the end of it where he's like, gaps as a last refugee for God. And it's kind of like that they can acknowledge that as like science and technology is advancing, that like, you know, there's less and less spaces for like God and their faith to creep in. Sort of like really like this sort of like desperation is like really pass through that, you know.
Good. That's certainly how he wants to depict it. He senses a kind of desperation, yeah, and a lack of care and concern, whereas science is intentionally plodding, and I mean I'm going to spell it plodding. It plods along, although it moves pretty quickly in the last few centuries. But scientists, as Aiden points out, this is the bottom 152, that quote she mentions, like they try and be political about it. They're not willing to say with certainty, you know, weigh in yet until they have all the evidence. The creationists, they don't mind. They look for lack of evidence is the whole point. So as he describes it, it's directly antithetical to the scientific outlook. Finn.
Oh, hi. 1 second. Sorry. You can keep going.
Okay, Em, you had your hand up.
Yes. I don't know. I was curious if anybody else found his reasoning to be like super like this Eurocentric Western capitalistic thought process where like he is truly believing that there are always going to be answers to these questions and problems that we have, and being very against the people who are like, well, we don't need to find the answers. And yeah, I found it interesting because Brittany knows this. We had a podcast we had to listen to in our psychology class about mental health and how there aren't solutions to all of our problems. Sometimes the solution is no solution. And I found it really odd that he is taking these people who, yeah, there is like a, yes, thank you, Brittany. She just shared it in the chat. That there are people who like see this lack of information, this lack of scientific knowledge, and kind of use that to their advantage and kind of push their agendas. But I don't think there's a problem with saying we don't know why this thing happens, and that's okay. I don't need to know the answer.
Thanks, Em. You said a lot of different things there. So let me try and pull this apart. On one hand, you said it was Eurocentric. So I'm not exactly sure how the drive for certainty is Eurocentric. You'd have to explain that. The other thing you mentioned was psychology. That's awesome. That sounds like an amazing podcast that I would highly recommend to everybody. That was actually Freud's conclusion. Like, sorry, there's no certainty to your psychological problems. And a lot of psychologists had problems with that as well. They didn't want to accept that. A lot of patients too. In general, between science and religion here, he seems to suggest that religion is perfectly fine. Sorry, that science is fine with uncertainty. But you're right. You're right. And there is this feeling. I'm trying to decide what kind of word I should use. There's a belief. I think there's a belief in modern science that maybe they won't answer everything, but they will progressively answer these questions. This has been a pretty big debate in modern science for ever since Descartes. Descartes believed that complete knowledge was close, and he was not correct. I don't know what scientists believe anymore, especially my best friend's dad is an astrophysicist, and he spends his days studying the expanse of the universe, which continues to expand, right? So I don't know if science believes they can find all the answers anymore. Dawkins certainly doesn't rule it out. The point is he looks forward, he's happy with the uncertainty. He thinks that religion is not, right? And that religion, when it sees uncertainty, just says, that's God, that's the divine, right? And is done with it. But anyway, you have sparked some people who want to talk here. So if you want to specify or clarify anything you said, Em, put it in the chat and I'll see let me go down the list here. Finn?
Yes, hi. I was actually, what was it? I was gonna bring up something about when you talked about science being like halted by like sort of like the fear, or not the fear, but like the kind of like begrudging acceptance of like whatever creationist clapback there would be to some theories. And it's like you can't really confidently say something without like the fear of people like finding your holes and being like, well, this is proving my point. And I was just going to talk about how I think that what stands out the most in Dawkins' writings is like when he actually discusses the problems with it. He doesn't, there's a few times where it feels like he's kind of coming for certain like groups of people and certain like things, and he has I think that it's like he has his right to do that, I guess, but I'm like, it all made more sense when he talked about like the actual issues that like brings to society, when he says like, oh, like this is halting progression, this is halting progress when people do this, when people are indoctrinated, when people are taught fear, and that halts an intellectual progress because for many reasons, right? So you don't understand what scientists are saying. But when he gets like, I think that's why he loses his like I lose him a little bit when he gets into like more like, and this is why you're wrong, because I'm like, you're kind of just like, it's not going to go away. And I'm like, I think that I would be much more interested in him talking about like using, I mean, like if there's the scapegoats for like Islam or like Shia law and like terrorism that people always use, they try to like say that anyone who is Muslim is an extremist because they're racist usually. But why don't you talk about those problems instead? Why don't you talk about that extremists pop out from imperialism, nationalism? Why don't you talk about how certain tenets of Abrahamic religion encourage misogyny, not cause it, you know? Like, so I just think that it's like you can talk about the problems and how they are slowing progression without like flipping off people, you know, who find comfort in their like culture or practice. Anyway,
thank you, Arthur.
Yeah, kind of to like I guess add some concepts with Finn and M's like ideas. He tends to like kind of, the way he presented things very much felt like he was trying to win a debate, like kind of black and white arguments, when in reality I feel like a lot of these concepts are like webs of ideas instead of like one or the other. And I feel like even with you know, like Finn mentioned, like how he depicted like Muslim people was kind of strange. And strange is an understatement, but shoot, I had a thought, I'm sorry, I like forgot it. This like concept of black and white, And I guess this idea, I'm thinking about like the fossils, like when he starts talking about that, and like the gaps and how people like point to that. It's like, even like he's like, oh, we just don't know about it yet. But it's like, you have to admit that there's some things like we'll never be able to know, which is kind of what Em was talking about. I'm sorry, I had more thoughts and I think most of them
Okay.
left. So thank you, I'm done.
I'll just say, I think he would say that's not a problem. The fact that there are things that are not, that might resist solution, that's not a problem. That's a cause for excitement among scientists. But above all, science should not leap to the conclusion about any of these problems, without sufficient evidence, right? Let's see. Rebecca.
Yeah, I just like that this is being brought up, because this was kind of something that I was thinking about while I was reading this. And I honestly can't remember whether or not he mentioned this, but to me it felt like a lot of the religious people that Dawkins was speaking to were primarily people who were trying desperately to prove creationism or convert people into believing creationism, which I know that there are plenty of people who fall into different religions that either don't really care or do believe in like natural selection to a degree. And I know he also said that moderate religious people are still bad. But it seems like he wants to ignore the fact that for some people, like, religion is genuinely helpful for them. And again, like, the idea that he believes that every single question will eventually be answered by science. Like, I just am not sure about that. And I also, like, I don't think we should exploit ignorance or exploit gaps and just be like, okay, well, this means that whatever I believe is true. But I do also think, like, you don't have to see a gap in knowledge and use that as an opportunity to immediately try and chase down answers. Like, I feel like it is okay to be fine with gaps in knowledge. I'm not sure how I feel about this idea that, like, eventually humanity is going to be all knowing. And that was kind of where I started to, because I think he made a lot of points that I felt a little called out by. And I was like, oh, actually, this is making me question some things about myself. But at the same time, I just disagree with, like, the complete opposition to all forms of religious thought. Like, it doesn't add up to me, especially now that I know it was in the context of, like, he's opposing Islam, and, like, a lot of it was informed by 9/11. Like, that, yikes. Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it.
Thank you. Zach.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to what I think it was something that Em was saying about the drive for certainty being a Western thing. I think that there actually is some validity to that, because of, like, the idea that empiricism or empirical thought is kind of like a dominant ideology in, like, the sciences, and that was a Western conception. So I think that there's something to that. Also, I just wanted to say that, like, I don't necessarily think that he means to say he thinks all religious people are bad people, but his argument is that, at least the way I understood it, was that, like, religion existing opens the door for religious extremism, which, like, of course it does, because, like, how could religious extremism exist without religion? I don't know, maybe I'm wrong in thinking that he doesn't actually, like, think they're bad people, but that's just kind of what I took from it.
Well, there's more to it, but we'll deal with that in a second. Just let me comment on one thing, and then we'll hand it back to Arthur. I'm thinking about Em and Brittany were chiming in about this, tying capitalism and science together. And you're no doubt, like, first of all, there are plenty of historians of science who will tell you that science is not an exclusively Western venture. That is, however, modern science, you could argue, is dominated by Western notions of rationality, for sure, and more importantly, Western notions of the subject, of the thinking subject. I've often believed that Descartes leaves a very strong imprint on science. And I'm struggling to understand why we're zeroing in on certainty here. You know, I guess, you know, I don't know how many scientists Dawkins represents. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not sure how much of science he represents. I tend to think that not all scientists are of his mind. Einstein, for example, famously looked at the vastness and complexity of the universe and said it's obvious that God exists. Einstein said that. You know, Dawkins is of a mind that a scientific approach and a scientific understanding of things leaves no room for God. And I actually think I know why, and I should tell you why. Because in short, you know, we have a lot of proofs for the existence of God. I know I've been talking about these, but haven't even looked at any really. The most important proof of the existence of God is actually the proof from design. And it's very simple. It's basically what he's been implying throughout, that because everything looks designed, there must be a designer. And that designer is God. That's how Aquinas puts it. But Dawkins and Dennett actually believe something else that is kind of unique in you. They believe they have a proof that God does not exist. You don't get that often. There are many proofs of the existence of God, and then there are people who say, I don't believe your proof, which leads to agnosticism or atheism if you refuse to believe. But what's new here is that Dawkins and Dennett believe that evolutionary biology actually furnishes proof that God does not exist. And I'm just going to see if anybody knows what it is. Well, hang on, Em. Can't disagree yet till we get it out there. Anybody know what it is? It's actually coined by Dennett, this theory, and he raises it in passing. So I don't expect you to have caught it necessarily, but I figure I might as well tell you about it because I think this explains in part his certainty. So why does the theory of evolution prove that God does not exist? This is on page, looks like it's page 145, 146. Huh, Jesus, is that it? Anyway, the point is this: the theory from design looks at the evidence and says there must be some greater mind that created this, right? Evolution points out, however, and explains that complex beings are the result of a process of natural selection, right? Therefore, God would have to be some later creation, as some kind of all-knowing mind would have to be some kind of later creation, right? I'll put it otherwise. The theory of design presupposes that God exists in order for there to be designed things in this world. Evolution turns it all on its head and says design is the process, or what looks to be design is actually the long process of natural selection. You don't need some big mind at the beginning to get the ball rolling. If anything, the big mind will come at the end. It would be the product of evolution. I think I pretty much said it. M says, this is really confusing because evolution proves it doesn't exist, not God. All right, M. The designer, the world is not the product of an intelligent design. If anything, the mind comes at the end. Right now, the human mind is the greatest creation of natural selection, right? And look how frail we are. It is highly improbable that an omniscient being is at the end of this theory of evolution. Maybe it could be, maybe that's where it's going. I don't know. It just proves that there is no designer at the beginning. It would be at the end. All right, I'm going to pause there for a second. Arthur, you've had your hand up, and I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. I'm just trying. I'm unsure how this is definitely like conjunctionally related to what you just said, but I guess I was thinking more about this idea of progress, and I guess like evolution in his eyes is like progress. But I guess like this idea that progress is like the ultimate goal kind of rubs me the wrong way, and that like especially when he was talking about Alan Turing, I think I like partially mentioned this in my response, but and he talks about, you know, how he was like basically given two horrible options once they discovered he was homosexual. I think it was like being jailed or being like given like hormonal fucked up treatment. But his like main argument was like, well, Alan Turing is so smart and he created computers, so this is a crime. And it's like, that's it? Like he has to be like useful like for you to like consider him like worthy of progress or living? Like this idea that you have to be like working toward that progress that he envisions to be like worthy of life or worthy of his time bothers me. And I do think that that goes back to capitalism and stuff, this idea that like working is like the only thing you should be doing, and if you're not working for what society considers the greater good by, or you know, by this man, I don't know what I'm saying is like this idea that you have to be useful to deserve living or life, or you can't just like, maybe you don't want to do science for like your life, maybe you just want to enjoy nature or like whatever. I don't know. I guess that is to me related to like capitalism and like Westernism. Yeah, that's where I'm going with this.
Okay, thank you. Rebecca.
Yeah, I'm just now like seeing some broader questions that this might raise, which is like, if you can explain natural selection for like, I guess the universe or humanity at least. I mean, again, there's still so much we don't know, and like, I'm not gonna say aliens, but I do think like there are like other parts of the universe that we've never seen, that we may not know exist, and we don't know what's there. So I'm always thinking like, if this explains humanity, does it explain the rest? How can we find that out? Like, is he implying that eventually we will know that? And then it's like bringing me into like, well, what even is reality? How do we know that we're in that? Like, I don't know. It's getting very existential in my brain.
Good. It should. Arthur, did you want to go at it again?
Oh no, I'm sorry, I forgot to.
Worries. Yeah, I mean, I will say this, you know, Dawkins, I think he, you know, someone mentioned that he is imprecise when he speaks of religion. And he's imprecise in the way that he kind of uses the term loosely, you know, almost like a one size fits all category when that's not the case. For example, I'm Catholic. I have no problem with evolution, you know. A lot of religions don't. It seems that when he's taking on religion, he thinks creationism, but that's not. I mean, there are, as we'll see with Buddhism, there's atheist religions, you know. So James would point this out, by the way, right? He's the one who noticed that there's a, you know, infinite variety of religions, not only by sects, but according to individual approaches. But at the same time, there's diversity in science. And what I mean by that is, you know, I don't believe that all scientists view their field the way he does. Okay. I don't believe I don't think many scientists believe that they're close to certainty or the complete knowledge. Who knows if that's even possible? I don't know what that would look like. That was, as I mentioned, a prejudice of early modern science, that Descartes thought that was coming very close. Just imagine, you know, the very beginning of modern science, they thought, oh, we're going to know everything pretty quickly, right? It's kind of funny. I don't know why. So, but what that tells you is that modern science, since the Enlightenment, has always been filled with impressive bravado, which on one hand, before we all get down on science, let's just like thank Lord Jesus Christ for toilets and shit. Because man, I tell you what, like vaccines, like there's some good shit out there. Air conditioning, whippets. I mean, there's some good shit because of science, right? So don't pile on too fast, everybody. You know, anyway, Aiden.
I think like to comment on what you're saying, I think like the whole point he was making, which I kind of wish he'd have expanded upon, was that like the way science reacts to what other people are saying is going to be political. And I think that's true of like all scientific history, because like, I mean, the way in which science is viewed is always going to be affected by what's going on in the world around everyone. I mean, like the beginning of science probably was, you know, opening like up this whole new world of exploration, right? And then you right in the middle, it feels like we know everything. And then right now it's like people are still hesitant to say, do we know anything at all? Do we know everything? Like, just because of the way that there's so much division in what people, you know, are willing to listen to, I guess, from who.
Thank you. Thank you. Rebecca.
Yeah, I watched this video a while back. There's this like doctor on YouTube who during the pandemic has been like trying to provide like factual information about things because there's so much misinformation floating around. And he talked about the concept of the way science still can be misused and misinterpreted the same ways religion can. And so I think, and Emma was saying this in the chat as well, like I'm definitely not opposed to using science for things because it obviously like has real amazing contributions to society. But I think the pandemic can be pretty good evidence that people will see something kind of scientific or something that looks like it might be true and then take it like way beyond what it was concluding. Like when the hydroxychloroquine studies first came out, everyone was like, oh my God, this is a miracle drug. And then all of a sudden there's all these people acting like it's the cure to COVID and that all the other scientists are just hiding the truth. When in actuality, it was like one study that ended up not even really proving anything. And people did that with a lot of like COVID information. People do that with vaccine studies, like the Andrew Wakefield study is the reason for all these anti-vaxxers now. So I think it's less me saying like, well, you know, science sucks too, more so that in the same way that people misuse religion, people can still misuse regular information and regular studies in scientific processes to suit their own agendas. It's subject to the same human flaws that religion is. And it seemed to me that Dawkins was not addressing that as well as he could have.
Addressing what?
Like the way that science can be misused by humanity.
Good, thank you. Zach.
Yeah, I think it's just like science's MO is kind of its lack of lack of certainty about like factual knowledge in a way, because everything is posed as a hypothesis even after a study is done that could support the hypothesis. So it's kind of interesting that it can be used in a way that makes people feel really certain about what they're believing. Because, and that's even what he says in the writing, is that like there's always more questions that are like every solution yields more questions. So just the fact that people could use it as a certainty is kind of, I think, an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah. Don't forget, I mean, you know, religion has, at least in the West, religion has a bad history when it comes to science. It has stood in the way quite a bit. You know, there's the famous point where, why do you put science in quotation marks, Aiden? Did I misspeak?
No, I was just referring to the text above. Sorry.
Okay. I'm getting all self-conscious from this chat. I'm thinking of like Galileo, you know, when Galileo went to the Pope and he was in trouble, you know. The problem, of course, was this, right? According to the pre-modern view, the pre-modern view of the universe was geostatic and geocentric. The universe was geostatic and geocentric. Y'all know what geocentric means, right? What is geostatic? Now, Zach?
That like the Earth is unchanging, or that it's the same way that it's been forever.
It's actually literally static, dude. It doesn't move. That's what they believed. Why did they believe a thing like that?
Because the sun goes up and down in the sky.
Because they had fucking eyes. Because they looked. And it certainly looks like the universe, the sky is moving around you. So it was news to people's ears when they're like, what? You mean we're the ones moving? Science is very often counterintuitive, but you know, what Copernicus and Galileo proposed that was so mind altering and, you know, shattering for them, earth shattering literally, was, you mean the earth is no longer at the center of things? They had to move to a theory of heliocentrism, where the sun is at the middle. And then not only that, by the way, everything, the Aristotelian view, pre-modern view, was that the universe was all concentric. You had the earth at the middle, and then Mars around it, and Venus around it, and it was all just a collection of spheres. And then Kepler comes along and says, sorry, it's ellipses. They're like, what the fuck are you smoking? You know? So at every point, they were just, these guys are insane. Not only are they insane, but there is tremendous cultural cachet in the idea that the earth is at the center. Suddenly the earth is no longer at the center of things. Humans are no longer at the center. There were huge implications from that. So when Galileo goes to the Pope and says, listen, you know, I can back up these theories. Why don't you look through my telescope? The Pope refuses. He refused to look at the evidence. And then he, what's the word? He excommunicated Galileo, you know? So religion has absolutely stood in the way over and over again, repeatedly. I bet, and I'm sorry, Finn, I know you had your hand up. I just, let me get this last point out. I know that Dr. Dawkins would be a big, would not be a fan of, there is a, how should I put this? I guess it's like an amusement park or like some kind of open air museum in Kentucky. It's a creationist museum. I don't know if you guys have heard about this. It was featured in Bill Maher's movie called Religulous a few years ago, and it is a biblical museum in favor of creationism, and you see Jesus riding on dinosaurs. They have images of Jesus riding on dinosaurs and like patting a dinosaur's back and like hanging with the dinosaurs. And why do they do this? Because they want to point out that dinosaurs are not 200 million years old. They're 15,000 years old. So the evidence is there, because who can deny the evidence? You're finding fucking dinosaur bones in North Dakota. Biblical creationists are not going to deny that the evidence is here, but they're going to say, no, it's not 150 billion years old, it's 15,000 years old. And Jesus, in Jesus' time, he would have known them. In fact, this is what the ark looks like, Noah's ark. They would have been on there, right? Things like that. Well, that kind of willful ignorance is exactly the kind of thing that Dawkins is not going to tolerate, right? Okay, Finn, I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna make a joke about how like you're talking about how like scientific or accurate things are always like, what do you mean? We're not moving. Or what do you mean the earth is flat?
Yeah.
I can't see a curve. I feel that way every time I watch period pieces where they have bloodletting. Bloodletting makes so much sense to me. I'm like, if your arm is swollen, you let it out. That makes so much sense to me. I would die so fast.
Yeah.
Like,
and you know, before we all get all haughty here, like, oh, those silly people, that was the way only 100 years ago. They had bloodletting machines at the end of the 1800s, right? That was modern science not long ago. Yeah, I mean, flat earthers, I understand there's quite a few that are still hanging these days, especially in the United States.
they're hanging off the edge of the disc.
We don't need to go very far. Think about, there was plenty of religious objection to the COVID vaccine, to the COVID protocols, and to the COVID vaccine, right? Religion has stood in the way of science not long. Aiden, do you have your hand up again? I'm sorry. Someone.
It's only for a minute. I just no, never mind. It's fine.
All right. Well, if you think about it, come back. Alex.
I just wanted to add on that like flat earthers and that kind of like whole headspace of conspiracy has actually gone up like 50% in the past like 20 years. And it's just kind of like, what's going on?
Well, I'll furnish the numbers for you next week, but there was an editorial in the New York Times about 10 years ago by Charles Blow, who's one of their columnists. And he was and it was detailing like the demographics of belief of certain things, like how many Americans believe in angels, how many Americans believe in demons. First of all, you need to understand that somewhere around 45% of Americans do not believe in the theory of evolution. Somewhere in the order of 40 to 45%. Maybe it's 35. Something about 44% believe in demons, 40% believe in angels, right? 77%, something like that, believe in God. That's the least controversial of these things. So, some of these beliefs stand in the way, more in the way of science than others do. But the ones that do stand in the way, there's a lot of people who believe them. They're very popular belief in it, especially in this country. I'd have to think about how they stand in the way of climate change. I was reading recently, someone was explaining the Christian fundamentalist opposition to doing anything about climate change. The argument being that, oil was put on this earth for us to use, and the creatures of the earth were put here for us to use, and we better use them. So of course the Pope strenuously disagrees. Any case, Okay. Anybody else wanted to chime in there? Yes, go for it, Zach.
Yeah, I think that also oil companies being so deeply tied to American culture and religion being so also tied to American culture, there's almost like a transitive property thing that happens. And I think that also like in a lot of like small like rural communities where a big part of the industry is oil, I think that that connection becomes even stronger because of the community aspect of religion and the community aspect of these corporate environments.
Yeah. I would also ask the other question, which is like, why do you feel the need to have religious sanction for this? You know, I mean,
Well, I
anyway.
almost imagine like striking oil, which is like a really lucrative thing to be almost like viewed as a like a religious experience. I could totally see that happening, or like in a sort of like a weird like earth religion kind of way, where like these, like we said, these resources are like, it's almost like they're here for us to find and for us to take and exploit.
Well, it also fits with the reading of Genesis. The opening of Genesis says that man has dominion over the birds and the fish of the sea. And that word dominion has been debated about, but it looks like it's opening the door like they are here for us, right? Again, the Pope has and others have interpreted this very differently. I'm just pointing, this is just my way of pointing out like how religion repeatedly stands in the way of scientific progress, right? Finn?
Oh, yes, sorry. I was just gonna say, you mentioned like you were just talking about like oil and how Christians were kind of explaining why pollution's okay and stuff. But I was just gonna say like it's so interesting to see the relationship between like conservative values and evangelical ones, like so it's like in seeing who's benefiting. And so if you look at really rich right-wing people, yeah, they want the oil to keep being burned. Yeah, they don't want these companies going down. They're going to support, and they hide behind the we're just men of God moment. But it's just like, nah, man, like there's just too much. I just think that like that wouldn't really be involved because that's just about corruption, I guess. But it's just like it's I think that the parts of religion that need to be discussed more are the politics and are like how it's misused, not dismantling it, like just like talking about what is harmful.
Good. Finn, I might point out, for example, that the Native Americans have a completely different religious argument for keeping the oil in the ground.
Yeah,
right?
Yes.
I think you'll appreciate this quote. Your last section here from Dawkins, he says over and over, he says, terrorists, they do these things because of what they believe. Noam Chomsky, my hero, professor at MIT, says, you know, all religious wars are about politics at the end of the day. They're about politics.
Literally.
We'll have more time to talk about that later. I'm going to get these two more comments here, and then I have something else for us to do. All right, Rebecca.
Yeah, I think you had said earlier, I think you said something like, in terms of the climate argument, or really any argument, like, why does religion even have to be a factor in this? And I definitely am a firm believer in separation of church and state. So I think when it comes to like politics or like legislation, religion shouldn't have any role in that. However, I do think that for some people, especially fundamentalists, you're pretty much not going to change people's minds about something unless you can find a religious reason for it.
That's right.
So like, what I really just don't understand about the fundamentalist argument for like why fossil fuels are okay is that, like, you mentioned that Genesis verse, but like there are also other verses about God encouraging not just dominion but stewardship over other animals and over resources. And I always say this to my dad because he's a climate change denier, that Revelation says that the next flood of the earth is going to be fire. And we're getting real close to that. So I feel like the only way I'm ever going to be able to at least even get him to believe that we should be taking care of the earth is by making religious arguments for it. Of course, there are some things like that are political that I feel like there is no religious argument for. And in that case, I genuinely don't know how I would change those people's minds. But I feel like in terms of the climate, like there are like good religious arguments for why we should be maybe not harvesting all this oil.
Well, this is where thank you. This is where I think Dawkins is of value. There is a problem with religion. Okay, there is. And there is a problem with different types of belief. The problem is that he doesn't differentiate between different types of belief. Faith is faith, according to him. He has a statement here in the last section where I have to find it again. I'll find it in a second. But basically, he doesn't, he thinks that faith and certainty go hand in hand. Nothing could be further from the truth. Faith has to involve skepticism and doubt. And, when it doesn't, then it is problematic. But that goes for, so I told you, I think I told you I like to quote bumper stickers. And so here's a bumper sticker I like to quote. So I've seen this a couple times. And it says, the Bible said it, I believe it, that does it. The Bible says it, I believe it, that does it. All right, end of fucking story. And I often see that bumper sticker and I have to pull over, smoke a cigarette, what the fuck does that mean? What's going on there? What's that? And that kind of certainty is troubling, because if you read the Bible honestly, it's not certain at all. Throughout there is doubt and questioning, and belief that is absent, doubt is very dangerous. Religion often has given rise to, apocalypticism. I don't know how to, I'm making up that word, but you know what I mean? Sometimes it's apocalyptic. And there's been a lot of discussion about, which certain religions are more prone to it than others. Christianity is very apocalyptic. It develops out of certain apocalyptic sects of Judaism, but it has really, it has recurred. This theme has recurred throughout Christianity. James Watt was the Secretary of Interior under the Reagan, and he was a fundamentalist Christian. And the Secretary of the Interior is one of these departments in the government I don't know very well, but I know that they are responsible for our natural preserves and our parks. And James Watt said before Congress, he said, "When the last tree burns, Jesus will return." The proposition being, it's all good. Jesus is coming. And, an end of days approach is very troubling, right? It excuses a lot. Why does that, why does that necessarily have to come about? Why, we saw it with the January 6 people who overran Congress. That was kind of an end of days approach. They're like, fuck it. Let's kill Nancy. The democracy's done. Where'd you get that idea from, bro? Where'd you get that idea from? You're white. Huh? Where'd you get that idea? You're not even black and you think that. It's impossible. It's incredible. And you have a gun. So the bigger question is where, is about, I think the more interesting question is about different types of religiosity and different types of faith. And, I think Dawkins is not wrong. There is a problem with certain types of faith. The bigger question, I think Finn was knocking on the door, is Why do certain types of faith emerge? Why do we make it hospitable for certain types of faith and not others? Zach.
Yeah, I think also just to add that this apocalyptic perspective on the world through religion is especially problematic when we're being faced with actual, existential threats to like the ecosphere and us by extension. Like it's some pretty real shit. And I think that, having these religiously observant people saying like, oh, it's okay that the apocalypse is coming because it's all fated to happen is very detrimental to those who are looking past like the near future. Yeah.
It's also directly contrary to the love of the gospel. It doesn't jibe in the slightest.
Yeah.
Which is why it's so troubling. Many of these people consider themselves biblical literalists, and yet literalists being, we'll deal with the Pia, they're people who read the Bible literally. I don't understand how you read the Bible literally and understand the ethical debacle that comes from an end of days approach. By the way, the book of Revelation, if you're going to read that, the book of Revelation, everybody, at the end of the Bible, that is where the apocalyptic view comes from. There are plenty of people in America who believe, they call this the rapture, okay, or the end of days. There used to be, about 10 years ago, I'm not sure if it's still out there, used to be something online called the Rapture Index, and it would keep track of events that were happening, like the war in Iraq, saying, this was predicted in the book of Revelation. Because in Revelation, there's a battle in Mesopotamia. Jesus comes riding on a horse out of the river Euphrates with a horse has a sword in his mouth, blah, blah, blah. And people take this very seriously. And yes, there is a lot of overlap with the QAnon crowd. But if you accept the rapture, and if you read Revelation literally, 144,000 people will be saved. That's not many. Now, I'm going to get on that boat. I don't care what they say, but that's not many. That means several billion are fucked. What kind of moral outlook is that? Right? So I just don't understand. I think there's a big problem, this apocalyptic outlook and the ethos of the gospel. They don't go hand in hand. Okay, Chris, I'm done.
Oh, okay. I was just like, when you're bringing up apocalypse, and I was like, well, in the Dawkins reading, he does mention about like, like if a nuke were to go off somewhere and then this big ball of fire, like if New York City was just engulfed in fire, and there'd be like these religious people like, wow, God's miracles, that's amazing. Which, I mean, I don't know. Does that feed into like what you're trying to get through here?
Yeah. I remember that quote. I think that's exactly the point he was making. You all are little bebes when 9/11 happened, but there were plenty of people who believed that was religiously justified. I remember when the Hurricane Katrina happened in 2005, one of the prominent evangelists, maybe Pat Robertson, I think it was, or someone said this was punishment for tolerating homosexuality. It's strange how this stuff recurs. And what I'm interested in is like, I guess as a philosopher, I'm just interested in, how these belief systems flourish, but anyway. Anybody else? Any other questions or issues or comments? I feel like I've been a little preachy today. I apologize. I don't mean to preach at you. Why don't we talk about evolution? So I wanted to do breakout rooms, but I think we only have about 10 minutes, so I'm not going to sweat it. We'll do that next week. Well, there's two bigger issues that in the reading that we haven't really, like, we've skimmed over, we haven't really jumped into. But why don't we talk about this? I think Zach mentioned it. I've been explaining that there are variations in different types of religious faith, and apparently Dawkins is not impressed with me, because in your last section, oh God, Chris, I have too much. I have kids. I'm too busy. You guys do it. You're young. Come on. And you're artists. Do it yourself. I'll come later. Oh yes. So he's not going to be happy with me because he tells us at the end of the reading that moderate religion is also to blame. All religion is to blame. Even those fucking Quakers who are doing nothing but making oats and sitting in their meeting room. They're all to blame. Why? Churning butter. Zach.
Yeah, so the way that I read and thought about it was just that, like, religious extremism doesn't exist without religion, and that religion existing creates an environment in which religious extremism can exist. Basically, that's like basically.
Good. Thank you. Chris.
Yeah, he brings up this thing where it's like, like we see good faith as like virtue, or like unquestioning faith as virtue, and that's something that's instilled in a lot of people as children. So then when you get older and like, someone can justify anything, like, well, that's my faith, that's my belief, and you're just like, okay, I have to respect that. And the way that can like escalate into like you see more and more of these things happening, you're like, well, that's their faith, I can't really do anything about it. And yeah.
Thank you. Who's that again? Gia.
So I kind of interpreted it as like if there is religion at all, like there's a higher tolerance for religious belief. So that allows for people who are extremists to feel at comfort. And somewhere in the reading, he said that like extremists are just like us, that they claim what they're doing is good. Like they don't go around thinking, oh, I'm extreme, like what I'm doing is bad. They go around thinking that that's like normal. And it has more to do with the fact that it's the religion's fault and not so much the actual extremists' fault.
Good. Right. Thank you. Chris, did you want to say something else? No. Okay, good. Yeah, this comes up around page 342. He says, even mild and moderate religion helps to provide a climate of faith in which extremism flourishes. That's the quote Zach was making. How does he, so even mildly religious people, they enable the extremists, and basically he complains that they downplay the importance or the role of religion in extremist violence. He points out, and many of you notice he picks on Islam quite a bit, and the reason he does that is because, I guess you guys are a little bit removed from this, but 10, 15 years ago, I can tell you this discussion would have gone very differently because, it was pretty common to view and characterize Islam this way. Any case, sorry, I got a little sidetracked. And in England, of course, in the mid 2000s, there were several major attacks. Even in the last few years, there have been some notable attacks. And he points out that the recurring defense is, you'll hear moderate Muslim clerics say, but this is not Islam. Those guys, they're not really Muslim, right? We heard exactly that thing after 9/11. That's not Islam. Islam is the religion of peace. And he has a pretty, harsh rebuttal on page 345. He says, in the middle of the page, then there is a great chorus of disownings as clerics and community leaders line up to explain that this extremism is a perversion of true faith. But how can there be a perversion of faith if faith lacking objective justification doesn't have any demonstrable standard to pervert? And then talking about the history of Islam, this is a very common critique you've heard in the last 10, 15 years about Islam, is that the history of Islam is one that has been marred by violence. You know,
What's Christianity?
Christianity is also builds itself as a religion of peace and has a long history of violence as well. But that those two together, right? That's his point. Like, these moderates are full of shit. You're trying to shake, you know, your reputation for violence. Sorry, no can do. Chris?
Yeah, I was just gonna mention what you just said, where it's like these very people who are telling you, like, you know, don't question, you know, the religion, are also the first ones going like condemn these acts and be like, that's not true religion. But that just leaves everyone confused. What is true religion? And it's also like, I think it is like, you know, especially here in the United States, where like from a, like a young age we're taught, you know, oh, tolerate everything, you know, everything can be debated, like everything's a, and it's like that really leads to like where we are now, where it's like now we have like literal, you know, like people spouting Nazism in Congress, where it's like, I forgot her name, but I think she just got like kicked out of some sort of like Senate committees or whatever. And it's like, because we're taught to just like tolerate it instead of, you know, seeing them like that's not okay.
Okay. Thank you. Aiden?
I mean, to agree with kind of what Dawkins was saying, but on a broader scale, and not to like single out any one religion. It's like the existence of an organized religion opens itself up to, like, I think he said perversion of a religious faith, right? But it's like any kind of interpretation, extremism or agnosticism, like going, I think agnosticism in America a lot of times follows Christianity, and like morally, I guess, or the existence of a single God.
Mm-hmm.
But like to have it exist at all, it just opens it up to any type of interpretation, and then saying that this isn't part of your religion is fine, because I mean, if your religion follows this text exactly, you're still opening yourself up to any type of interpretation, no matter what, you know?
Good. Yeah. Thank you. By the way, the salient quote I wanted to give, I gave the wrong one, but this is the one, the bottom page 345 is the better one. And this is going to repeat a lot of what you just said, Aiden. He says the bottom page 345, but what is so hard for us to understand is that these people actually believe what they say they believe, that is terrorists. The take-home message is that we should blame religion itself, not religious extremism, as though that were some kind of terrible perversion of real decent religion. The religion is perverse itself. Voltaire got it right long ago. Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. So did Bertrand Russell, 20th century philosopher. Many people would sooner die than think. In fact, they do. So in his view, it's all part and parcel. And you may not separate them. Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I mean, I just, I think as a non-religious person, having grown up that way, I have a lot of anger for organized religions, and it seems that way, like that way that Dawkins does, that it feels like a lot of evil comes out of the existence of religion itself.
Good. And this is a very important argument for him, right? In some ways, this is their most important claim of the new atheists, that, you know, religion is deeply, deeply problematic. You know, it has caused so much suffering and violence throughout the years, even while the religions claim to be in the name of peace, and they claim to teach morality, right? Why is it that they're always wrapped up in massacres? Right? He says it's no mistake. It's because it's the nature of faith itself. And then the moderate believers, well, just their existence encourages the extremists. It makes them possible. Right.
I mean, banking on something or just living your life by something that is at its core an interpretation of everything. It's like there's no way to stop people from interpreting further if religion is just an interpretation of all life.
Well, can you be a little more specific? Because there's a lot of things what do you mean by interpret? I mean, science is an interpretation too. So
yeah, I mean, I guess that like the way that you choose to interpret the world without, I guess, solid proof will allow people to interpret that same instance
there you go.
however they choose to, or to interpret that off of the way that you choose to see things.
That's good. Yeah, I think you have captured Dawkins' point very well, Aiden. I think that's it. It's the nature, and that's the quote of Bertrand Russell there. The nature of faith is that this is a mindset that tolerates the absence of objective proof, objective evidence, and that is the road to hell. I think that's his view. That's his claim. You open the door you make society hospitable for people who can make similarly unjustified belief claims. Arthur?
Yeah, I guess I'm sort of agreeing with him in that, because like in my ancient through Gothic class, we're talking about like these ancient civilizations, and like one of the markers in our textbook was like, oh, this is considered a society now because like organized religion has popped up, which obviously is like an outdated idea, but that you need to be civilized with like organized religion. But a lot of like why they considered that to be like the first example of like quote or like a modern society is because like this religion comes with like these rules that people have to follow. And I feel like that's kind of the core issue is like people under organized religion, people aren't able to explore their faith like personally in like a way that doesn't fall under like what they have to wear every day or what they do. And like if you want to, that's great. Like if you that's how you express your religion, that's fine. I just think it's like the inability to be flexible is like how you end up like spiraling into this like into fascist ideology essentially.
Good. Zach?
I think to build off what Arthur was saying, that maybe we could bring this into the reading about mysticism from James, that like mysticism or spirituality is important because it can subvert the traditions that are associated with organized religion, and that they can kind of exist in a personal way outside of religion as an institution.
Wait, can you say that again? I kind of lost you, Zach. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's fine. Just that we could bring this into James' ideas about mysticism, and that it can exist in a personal way, in like a more secular way outside of the institution of organized religion.
Does it? Has it? I mean, I guess so.
I mean, I think just the idea that it's a personal experience, it makes it more personal than the traditions that are associated with a religious institution.
Well, the only problem is, as we all pointed out, like his definition seems to be missing something kind of fundamental to religion as well, which is the community aspect. And, whenever you have a community aspect, you're always going to have political tussles and political struggle. That's kind of inevitable. I know that, that organized religion is the big problem for a lot of people. I get that. Heck, I'm Catholic. I know. I know it intimately. So I've done a lot of thinking about like organized, why we have organized religion. What's the point of the organization, And we don't have time to get into it, but I don't know that you can pull them apart. I think you're always going to have an organized element with religion because of community involvement, because part of the turn to religion is that people are looking for a community. It's not all individual. In that case, I'm not sure you can ever. So the way I've always thought about it is, I think the way I put it as a political philosopher is, I think one of the biggest problems with religion is actually political. It's politics. It's the way religions are run, and the way they tend to abuse people sometimes. Also, the way they tend to galvanize people to, violently. These are the problems. But ever since, the Enlightenment in Europe, and again, I'm going to mention my homeboy Spinoza. I talked about him last week, Dutch philosopher, Jewish philosopher of the 1700s. The big idea has been, how can we try to, can religion be modified? Can religion be, for lack of a better word, improved? How can we keep the good parts and distill it of what's pernicious? I think there are examples of it out there. I do. But Dawkins doesn't think so, right? He doesn't think so. Let me bring this to a close here because of the time. 346, he rejects the proposition that we should respect the religions and religious faith because it is religious faith. He says extremists do what they do because of the tenets that they believe in. In the end, it's about belief. Belief is the problem. And this is on 346. Oh, no, I said that already. Oh, I think it was 348 is what I wanted to say. Pop of it, 348, this is very ending. He says, immunized against fear by the promise of a martyr's paradise, the authentic faith head deserves a high place in history of armaments, alongside the longbow, the warhorse, the tank, and the cluster bomb. Whew. Religious belief is like the cluster bomb. If children were taught to question and think through their beliefs, instead of being taught the superior virtue of faith without question, it is a good bet there would be no suicide bombers. Terrorism is about belief. If we had more secular people out there, they wouldn't be blowing themselves up. That's his conclusion.
I mean, they're still like psychopaths.
Well, I think we're butting up against a different question, right, Finn? I'm calling on Finn because he was kind of alluding to this earlier. Why do terrorists do what they do? I know what they say. We all know what they say. He quoted them. They all say it's for Allah, it's for martyrdom, right? But is that the real motivation, right? Are you being honest? Are you looking honestly at the causes? Are you looking honestly and frankly at the situation and the motivating factors, right?
It's like the idea that a merciful God, if you are in a situation that, I don't think that any extremists just come out of nowhere. Okay, no, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that they wake up one day and say that, like, they're living a normal, peaceful life. They're usually in a state of distress. There's usually something going on in their country. There's usually something political, social, something occurring. And then you think, if there is a God, the God would will vengeance. Right? So that leads to those like states of mind. And it's always like, I think in that situation, since things like that can tend, especially when there's casualties, it can be blamed outside the individual. I think that the aggressors need to take responsibility in seeing what they're doing. If there's wars going on in your backyard and you've been financially destroyed by American oil tycoons, I'm like, I don't blame them for wanting a little death to America, guys. Like, like that's just like, I just think that it just goes so beyond like just what Allah would will, right? That comes in with it, because if a God loves you, a God would not want this for you.
Right. So at the end of the day, I'm a little critical of Dawkins' description of belief. I don't know that belief is as simple as he describes it. I also don't believe it's as powerful as he says it is. I think we would have to consider a host of motivating factors when it comes to any kind of religious violence. As I said earlier, I tend to side with Noam Chomsky. If you study the religious wars throughout history, and there are many, you will always find political motivating factors, and that are at least as, if not more, important. And then religion becomes like the top hat, right, to justify things. That's not to say that religion is also not like fuel on the fire that is very handy to get people roiled up. But any case, I think you have to have a more expansive notion. Many of you guys were already alluding to this, and we'll get into it later. When English people criticize Islam, it's a very complex story. Okay, it's very complex. All right, Aiden.
Oh yeah, sorry.
No, go for it.
I think a good historical example for kind of religion being on both sides of things is something I reviewed when I took a class on ancient religions, and it was the beginning of the Holocaust, basically, and how the tension between German, I guess Catholic Germans or not Jewish Germans, kind of felt hostile toward Jewish residents there, and how because of the close-knit, very unsocial, I guess, society that Jewish folks had built in Germany at the time, kind of like just kept feeding the fire of hostility between the two groups, and how it led to the justification of the bigger picture of the Holocaust and racial genocide.
The history of anti-Semitism in Germany is very long, of course, and to say that it was sparked by religious animosity, I'm very dubious of that, because the Germans were not particularly religious in the 1930s, so nor are they today. So
no, but to see a group that was religious and was not inviting, I guess, of other beliefs at the time, not to say that Jews were not completely the victim in this situation, but that they, I don't know, were such a close-knit, not the way Christianity converts people, Judaism does not open itself to other people the way that other religions do.
Doesn't convert. It's not proselytizing.
Yeah.
Good. Thank you. I'm reading Sunny's quote here. Okay. Well, I think I have to let you guys go. It's 3. This was rocking. Lots of fireworks today. Love it. I had all kinds of plans. Forget it. I can't make plans for you people. So anyway, I'm gonna let you go because it's time. You need to go do other things. Next week, read Dennett. I believe the reading is more manageable. I'll take a look, just check. And your reading responses. And Brittany, chat on Discord. Cool. Keep it up. And so you got your papers. It was awful for you. Oh, I'm sorry. Was that because of the length, Brittany, or was it because of the dude? Or both? Both. Okay. Well, sometimes you're going to have to read people you don't like. Sorry. I don't like Dawkins, but what are you going to do? Okay. Anyway, I think he makes important things, right? He makes important points. You've got to reckon with these points. So, you know, that's it at the end of the day. Okay, that's all. I gotta go. I'll see you later. I'll stick around if anybody wants to say anything to me. Have a great weekend.
Thanks so much, Furman. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Have a great week.